You're an adult. You pay taxes. You answer emails. Your knees occasionally make noises they did not make 10 years ago. And then you walk into Disney. You hear a song you haven't thought about in 15 years. You see the castle. The fireworks start. And suddenly, for reasons that are surprisingly hard to explain, you're crying in front of complete strangers. And you're not alone. This happens to millions of grown adults every single year at the most surveilled theme parks on Earth. Nobody's embarrassed. Everybody's doing it. So why can Disney make a fully grown adult feel 8 years old again? The easy answer is nostalgia. The real answer is much bigger. Because Disney hasn't just spent decades building characters, movies, and theme parks. It has spent decades attaching itself to your memories. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how it works. The memory science, the park design tricks, why the merchandise isn't really merchandise, and the uncomfortable question sitting underneath all of it. Is this manipulation? Because the answer is yes, and also no. And the no part is where things get genuinely interesting. Let's get into it. Start with how memory actually works, because almost everyone gets this wrong. When people talk about nostalgia, they treat it like a highlight reel. Old movies, old songs, old toys, things you remember fondly. But nostalgia isn't just remembering something that happened a long time ago. It's remembering who you were when it happened. Psychologists call these autobiographical memories. Memories that are woven into your own life story. And that distinction changes everything. Because you don't just remember watching The Lion King. You remember who you watched it with, the house you lived in, the carpet you sat on, the VHS case, the person who always quoted the same line. Maybe you remember being scared of one scene, or insisting on watching the whole thing again immediately after it ended, because children have never once heard of moderation. The movie becomes fused with everything around it. So decades later, hearing a familiar piece of music doesn't just retrieve information. It retrieves a version of your life. And here's Disney's enormous, almost unfair advantage. For millions of people, its characters showed up early. Mickey, Cinderella, Simba, Buzz. They arrived before you understood anything about corporations, intellectual property, or quarterly earnings. To a child, Mickey Mouse isn't a corporate asset. He's Mickey. Now, psychologists have a name for part of this, the mere exposure effect. The more you encounter something, the more you tend to like it, simply because it's familiar. But Disney goes way beyond familiarity. Because the repetition happens during the most emotionally important years of your life. The same characters, over and over. On television, on pajamas, on backpacks, at birthdays. Over time, those characters stop feeling like entertainment. They become landmarks. You change. They don't. You get older. Mickey remains Mickey. And there is something strangely reassuring about that. Because adulthood is constant change. Jobs change. Relationships change. Bodies change. Technology changes every 6 minutes. And somehow your phone charger has changed again. But Winnie the Pooh still sounds like Winnie the Pooh. The castle is still there. The opening notes of a song still resolve exactly the way you remember them. Familiarity creates a feeling of stability. And Disney doesn't just understand this. Disney built a 25,000-acre physical environment around it. Which brings us to the parks. Because a Disney park isn't designed as a collection of rides. It's designed as an environment full of memory cues. Think about what happens the moment you enter. The architecture changes. The music changes. The smells change. The employees are called cast members. The outside world gets pushed farther and farther away. You're not being entertained. You're being immersed. And the clearest example is the very first thing you walk through. Main Street, USA. Main Street feels old. But not old in the complicated, historically accurate sense. It's an idealized past. Clean storefronts, warm lighting, horse-drawn vehicles. A version of small-town America that feels more like a memory than a real place. And that's the trick. It doesn't remind you of somewhere you actually lived. It reminds you of the idea of remembering. Main Street feels familiar, even if you never had a Main Street. It manufactures nostalgia for a past that never existed. And then, at the end of the street, perfectly framed, there's the castle. It functions like a visual magnet. You walk toward it, you photograph it, you watch fireworks behind it. And over repeated visits, that one image accumulates layers. The first trip, the honeymoon, the trip with your kids, the trip after someone was gone. The castle hasn't changed, but you have. And that's why places become emotionally powerful. They don't just contain your memories, they organize them. Now, Disney surrounds those memories with sensory triggers, and sound might be the strongest one. A melody can pull you backward in time almost instantly. You can go 15 years without thinking about a song, hear the first 3 notes, and suddenly remember every single word. Disney has decades of music working for it. Movie songs, attraction loops, parade scores, little sounds most people couldn't even name. You never consciously think, yes, this chord progression is activating an autobiographical memory. You just feel something. Smell works the same way. And Disney environments use scent heavily. Popcorn, candy, the water on Pirates. Sometimes intentionally engineered, sometimes just always there until your brain welds it to the experience. This is where the phrase Disney magic gets interesting. Because a lot of what feels like magic is actually recognition. Your brain notices something familiar before you can consciously explain why it matters. But here's the thing. Memory alone doesn't explain the crying. There's a second mechanism, and honestly, it might be the more powerful one. Disney gives adults permission. Think about how much of adulthood is self-monitoring. Be professional. Be productive. Don't look ridiculous. Don't get too excited. Don't wear the mouse ears to the quarterly budget meeting. Disney temporarily suspends those rules. Adults wear costumes. They hug characters. They wait 45 minutes to take a photo with someone dressed as a cartoon duck. And inside that environment, none of it feels strange. Because everyone around you has agreed to the same social contract. Play becomes acceptable again. Sincerity becomes acceptable again. You can be openly excited without immediately undercutting it with irony. And adults get almost nowhere else that encourages that. That's why character interactions can produce emotions that look completely irrational from the outside. You know there's a performer inside the costume. You know Mickey Mouse is fictional. Your logical brain has all the facts. And then Mickey hugs you, and you're crying. Why? Because emotions don't require literal belief. You cry at movies knowing the actors are acting. You feel dread during thrillers while sitting safely on your couch. You grieve fictional characters. Knowing something is constructed doesn't stop you from responding to what it represents. And in that moment, Mickey isn't just Mickey. He might be your childhood, a parent, a first trip, a person who isn't there anymore. The costume is real. The character is fictional. The emotion is completely genuine. Hold on to that idea, because it's about to explain something much weirder. Why people own 12 versions of essentially the same mug. But first, Disney locks these feelings in with one more tool: ritual. Maybe your family watches the same movie every Christmas. Maybe you take the same photo on every trip. Maybe you always ride one attraction first. Maybe someone buys an ornament every year. Maybe you always eat the same ridiculous snack that costs considerably more than any reasonable snack should cost. Those repeated behaviours matter because rituals create continuity. We did this before. We're doing it again. Hopefully we'll do it again later. And as you get older, continuity becomes more emotionally valuable. Because eventually you notice that life does not stay still. Kids grow up. Parents age. People move. Some people stop being in the picture. So repeating a ritual becomes a way of holding on to something, even while everything around it changes. Which brings us to the mugs. Because Disney is extraordinarily good at selling stuff. Pins, shirts, popcorn buckets, figurines, limited edition everything. From the outside, collecting looks irrational. Nobody needs 12 versions of the same character. They probably don't. But collecting was never about utility. Objects are memory anchors. A mug is not just a mug if you bought it on the trip when your daughter met Cinderella for the first time. A pin isn't just a pin if you traded for it with your dad 20 years ago. An ornament isn't just plastic if hanging it on the tree is part of your family's December. The object absorbs emotional meaning from the experience around it. And this is exactly where psychology and business collide. Disney doesn't have to convince you to care about a product from scratch. The emotional association already exists. The merchandise just gives that feeling a physical form, something you can hold, display, collect, and eventually buy another storage container for, because this situation has apparently escalated. It also explains the endless cycle of remakes, sequels, anniversaries, and revivals. People ask why Disney keeps bringing old stories back. Part of the answer is obvious. Recognizable intellectual property is commercially safer. But there's a deeper reason it works. Old stories come preloaded with emotional history. When Disney remakes something from your childhood, it isn't just marketing a new movie. It's activating your relationship with the old one. And then something even bigger happens. You bring your own kids. You show them the characters you loved. You play them the songs. You take them to the park. Your childhood entertainment becomes part of their childhood. Disney becomes something you inherited, and something you can pass on. Okay, time to answer the question I promised at the start. Is this manipulation? Yes, Disney is a business. It absolutely engineers environments, products, and experiences to produce emotional responses. It knows nostalgia is valuable. It knows familiar characters reduce risk. It knows scarcity drives demand. It knows you'll pay more for objects connected to meaningful moments. None of that is accidental. But here's the no part. Disney did not invent nostalgia. It did not invent autobiographical memory. It did not invent your attachment to ritual or family or childhood. Those are human tendencies that existed long before a mouse ever whistled on a steamboat. Disney just became historically, spectacularly good at building a business on top of them. And here's why that distinction matters. The feelings can be commercially encouraged and still be real. You can know exactly how a magic trick works and still enjoy the trick. You can understand precisely why the fireworks, the music, the lighting, and the memory cues make you emotional, and still cry when the castle lights up. Understanding the mechanism doesn't destroy the experience. Sometimes it makes it more interesting. And maybe this is the real reason Disney hits harder as you get older. When you're 8, childhood isn't nostalgic. It's just Tuesday. You don't know you're going to miss it. You don't know which moments will become important. You don't know how fast time is about to move. Adults know. And that knowledge changes everything. Because when an adult returns to something from childhood, 2 timelines are running at once. There's the experience happening now. And there's the memory of experiencing it before. You see the castle, but you also remember the first time you saw it. You hear the song, but underneath it, you hear every earlier version too. You watch your kid react to a character, and for 1 second, you remember being the kid. That's bigger than nostalgia. That's identity. Human beings build stories about who we are, where we came from, who mattered, what shaped us. And childhood culture is baked into that story. So returning to Disney can feel like reconnecting with evidence. Evidence that an earlier version of you still exists somewhere inside the current one. You're not 8 again. Not really. You still have the emails, the bills, the suspicious knee noises. But for a few moments, the distance between who you were and who you are gets smaller. And I think that's the real reason the castle makes adults cry. It's not because a building is magical. It's because the building has become a container for everything people have attached to it. Childhood, family, tradition, loss, time. Disney sells movies, it sells vacations, it sells merchandise. But underneath all of it, Disney sells access to a feeling. And maybe that's the actual product. Not childhood, not nostalgia, not even magic. Permission to remember what wonder felt like. Because when Disney makes you feel like a kid again, you're not really remembering Disney. You're remembering yourself. And if you've ever wondered why the things we watch, buy, and love get this deep inside our heads, you're in the right place. If you like this video, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more than you'd think. And subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. This is why we obsess, why we watch, why we buy, why we can't look away.